Welcome to Activate Your Introvert, the podcast for entrepreneurs and business leaders to help unlock more productivity and creativity so you get a better business. I'm sure you've heard the term comfort zone. Maybe you're aware of your own comfort zone or have been told that to improve you need to get out of your comfort zone. Because a comfort zone is where we feel comfortable, a situation where we feel safe or at ease. And one of the ideas that I often hear is that one needs to break out of one's comfort zone in order to change. Why do you need to be in a psychological state where you are uncomfortable and stressed just to grow? What about that statement would motivate anybody? I also hear it when it comes to introverts and meeting groups of people. Just get over it and spend time with the group. Break out of your comfort zone and get on with it. I'm pleased to say that my guest this week agrees with me. I love discussing introversion with other introvert experts, and today's discussion is a great example of why. Aoife Lennox is a specialist introvert coach from Ireland, and we will hear from Aoife very shortly. But first, time to burst one other quick introvert myth. Because several weeks into lockdown and it's introvert heaven. Introverts are loving all this solitude and extroverts are struggling. It's the time of the introvert. Have you heard that said? Well, I do, and I think it's complete bunkum. The myth is that introverts don't socialise, don't like to talk and like to spend their time without interaction. To get at the truth, we need to answer the question, how are you energised? If you're normally energised by spending time on your own, that's very different to people who are normally energised by spending time in large groups. For an introvert, a couple of days on their own can be energising. But after that, we're all human beings. We all need a level of interaction in the way that works for us. So the important point perhaps is, how are you managing your energy? What action are you taking to ensure that you have the right level of meaningful conversation for you? What introvert myth would you like exposed, or introvert tip discussed? I'd love to hear from you. I'd also like to receive your feedback on iTunes or podchaser.com. And if you'd like me to speak at your conference or help your team, I'd love to speak to you. Contact details are on the cover notes for this episode.
Good morning, John. Nice to be here with you.
Thank you. I know because we've talked about comfort zones, it's one of those things that you have an ongoing issue with. But just before we start that, are you an introvert or an extrovert?
I am most definitely an introvert, but I'm a newly aware introvert is how I would describe myself, because it really was only up until about 3 years ago that I kind of had my aha moment. And everything that I knew about myself just seemed to come in under the introvert heading. And it just really made sense to me. So I'm definitely an introvert in that I like to take time to make decisions. I'm a quieter person in large groups, but I can be very social in one-on-one. I like to process things. I like to take an awful lot of time. I suppose I'm very internally focused, which is how they would describe introverts, and like a lot of time alone in my own headspace. So yeah, I would definitely say I'm an introvert.
Really interesting for a couple of reasons. First of all, you gave a great explanation, that difference between one-to-one being social and in large groups, perhaps sitting at the back of the room, but also the processing and the way introverts internally process things rather than, I had an extrovert that I was interviewing a few weeks ago, and as she said, she thinks about things by talking about them, which
Yes.
can be very confusing to listen to as well.
Yeah.
The other thing you said, which was a couple of years ago, you realised you were an introvert. And that's something which lots of my clients, lots of people I speak to, when they realise, they go, oh, wow, I feel so much better about myself. What happened with you?
Exactly. Yeah, it was as simple as picking up a book. I picked up the book, The Introvert Entrepreneur by Beth Buelow. And as I read the book, because I always knew I was very entrepreneurial, but I always found it very difficult, the kind of sales, marketing, business development side of business. And I felt that it was because I wasn't outgoing enough. I wasn't extroverted enough. I wasn't loud enough. I wasn't aggressive enough. And I couldn't push myself and I couldn't, start and run a business. And then when I read that book, it was just such an eye opener to me, because the way she focuses the book is very much on the strengths of introverts and how you just choose a different path as an introvert. And I think that ties nicely into our conversation on comfort zones, because as an introvert, you can compare yourself a lot because we live in an extroverted world. I think that the fear part of the comfort zone can be very strong for us because of the comparisons, the judgment, self-criticisms. When you're comparing yourself to something you think that you should be, you feel when I was starting my business, I felt like I needed to be something else, and so I felt like I continually had to push myself out of my comfort zone. But that's a really uncomfortable place to be, and it's a very stressful sort of a life to live, to have to feel like you continually have to do that
No,
for yourself.
absolutely. I guess that's why they call them comfort zones, because they're a nice place to
Yeah,
be. But it certainly is one of those things that bugs me when people will just say, "Oh, just jump outside your comfort zone," as if
yeah,
it was
that
that
easy.
easy. I mean,
Mm,
I often talk to people about, don't try and get outside your comfort zone, but just try and gradually push at the boundaries of it.
exactly.
Obviously, stretching it a little bit is the way I look at it, rather than this idea of jumping through. How do you look at that as an introvert? How did you jump through that comfort zone, or however you phrase it?
Well, once I had that new awareness, that just changed my perspective on it. And I felt that it is just gently stretching yourself, gently doing things, right? So let's say in terms of networking. So it's not about deciding, right, I have to network, I have to get out there. Maybe it's doing one Zoom call a week. Maybe that's your approach to networking. So it's finding the things that work for you and just pushing yourself a little bit. I do think it's important, and I think we all have to stretch ourselves, because I think it gives you new perspective. You get inspiration, you get ideas, you learn all the time. We have to be growing and learning. I mentioned to you when I was kind of preparing for this, I had reread Susan Jeffers' book, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway, because I had read it years ago, but I just kind of picked it
Great
up
book.
again.
Me again, I
Yeah.
haven't read it. I haven't read it for a long time, I've got to say.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, it was great to read it again, and I highlighted a lot more. She said the fear will always be there when you're learning and growing. The fear will be there, and she breaks down in the first chapter, like, what is the fear actually about? And it's really the fear that I can't handle it. And
Mm.
if we can just kind of recognize that fear, recognize the emotions within ourselves, and just push ourselves a little bit, and say, okay, well, I did that now, and celebrate the wins. I always say to my clients, celebrate the wins, even the
Mhm.
little things. You made a phone call, you went to an event, whatever it is.
So very much we have a similar approach, and very much about the little bits you can do just to
Yes,
stretch or extend your comfort zone. As
yes,
you just said, definitely celebrate the wins, rather than comparing yourself with
yes,
people that do things completely differently. And that certainly
yeah,
comes back to really understanding your strengths in the first place, because
yes,
my strengths will be different to yours and different to everyone else's. That doesn't mean that I'm weaker or they're stronger. It just means we have different strengths, and so it's really important to understand what they are.
yeah. I was just going to
Now,
say,
go on.
it's not always about the big things. Like, I was reading about a woman who did the highest bungee jump in the world.
Love bungee
And
jumping.
oh, do you? Oh God.
Yeah.
No, yeah, it's that will never be in my needing to push myself out of my comfort zone to do that for sure. Um,
I'll tell you a really silly story about this though. There was once when I was doing some bungee jumping on a particular day, and I was trying to do a triple somersault on the way down. Don't
wow.
ask, it's just the way it was.
Wow.
And every time I could do two and a half. And here's the really crazy thing that happens next. Okay, so you go up in a crane, you jump out the crane, you get two and a half somersaults, you go back up in the crane, not a problem. So I'm chatting to the guy up there, and he says, "I think you need about an extra 2 meters to be able to do it. So climb out onto the roof of the crane and then jump from there."
Okay.
And here's the really silly thing: I was afraid of doing that. Now, isn't that stupid? What could possibly happen? I climb onto the roof of the crane and fall. Well, I'm going to fall off anyway. So
Yeah.
sometimes fear is just really silly, but
Wow.
couldn't do it. Really odd. And
Interesting.
anyway, sorry, I interrupted you
Yeah,
there.
well, no, I'd be very interested then because did doing that bungee jump and pushing through that, I mean, what did that offer you? Was that just a box you want to tick to do it, or is it something you enjoy, or is it like did it actually help you to be more open to doing other stuff outside your comfort zone, I suppose?
There's lots of things like that I've often wanted to do, and so it was for me a thing to do. Having done it, I absolutely loved it. There is a little bit of trepidation. You go up, and then you're standing there, and you're about to jump out. You however high up you are, and so there is still that trepidation. You know, the butterflies are definitely in the stomach. So to me, fear isn't about going not having any butterflies. Fear is about
Yeah.
going, I want the butterflies to fly in formation.
Yes. Yes, yes. And the yeah, you're always going to be fearful. And even I think if it's something you've done before and you're doing it again, it's about reframing that and just say, okay, maybe this nervousness is actually excitement and just kind of tell your mind that, you know. And I think the most important thing about comfort zones is that it makes us more adaptable, right? If we think about the current circumstances that we're living in, and we're all living in times of uncertainty now, and if we stretch ourselves continually, it helps us to be able to deal with change that then happens to us unexpectedly. Whereas if we have a tendency to hibernate within our comfort zone, we're very habitual, and it just makes it really hard when these unexpected challenges come up. So doing little things could be trying eat in a different restaurant, take a different route, like just try and break our habits a little bit. And that just helps you be really adaptable, which I think is of benefit to everybody.
I think that's a really good way of looking at it and suddenly makes a lot more sense because sometimes people have got business or their personal life is where they want it. And so they might say to me, well, why do I want to carry on growing?
Yeah.
And I think what
Yeah.
you just did is you gave a really good argument for saying continual growth is not about changing who you are, but it's
Yeah.
about making yourself more resilient and more of a stabilized person, as well as all the other reasons for personal growth. But
Exactly.
just a little bit at a time, which I think
Exactly.
is really good. Aoife, I think we've completely run out of time here. Some of the listeners may well want to get back in touch with you to talk about your version of comfort zones and introversion. What's the best way for them to do that?
Great. So they could look up my website. It's inside, INSIDE strategies, STRATEGIES.IE.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks so
Um,
much, John.
I look forward to speaking another day. Bye bye.
Great. Chat soon.
Thank you for listening to Activate Your Introvert, and I hope you've enjoyed this week's episode. I'd love to see your reviews on the iTunes store. Thank you once again, and catch up with you next week.